Chapter 25 of Lost in a Book. Belle gasped. She pushed her chair back from the table. She wasn't particularly afraid of large brown spiders, but she also wasn't accustomed to them standing in her food. As she watched the spider crawl over the pastries, her long, spiky legs sinking into the icing. As she reached the edge of the platter, a glossy black beetle landed on the table. Belle realized that it was the same beetle that had appeared at the Countess's ball. She recognized his shimmering wings. A few of the cafe's patrons noticed him and made faces, but kept right on eating. Belle glanced around for the Countess, but she was still inside the cafe. Would you like a sweet? She asked, the beetle picking one up off the platter and offering it to him. The beetle reared up on his hind legs and angrily smacked the pastry away with his fearsome horns. "You're being fed lies, foolish girl," he said, pointing a claw at her. Belle's eyebrows shot up. "You can speak?" she asked, amazed. "Clearly," he replied. "Stop eating things. It's dangerous in Nevermore." "Don't be silly. How can little pink cakes be dangerous?" Belle asked. Her tone was scornful, but as the words were leaving her mouth, a chilly sense of uneasiness stole over her. This was the second time the beetle had tried to warn her away from food. The beetle didn't answer. He looked around anxiously, picked up a custard tart, and threw it on the ground. The spider did the same with a cream puff. "Stop that!" Belle scolded, angered. Scowled. Belle scowled, angered. "That's rude, beetle." "Lucanus," said the beetle hotly, shoving a candied chestnut off the table. "My name is Lucanus, not Beetle. My friend here is Arena. Why mustn't I eat any food?" "Who sent you?" Belle demanded. She remembered that the Countess had told her that a mad woman owned the bugs, and that sometime they escaped. Had they flown all the way from the countryside to Paris? Or had the mad woman brought them here herself? Was she nearby? Belle looked over her shoulder nervously. "The who part is not important," the beetle said. "What is important is that you understand the rule of 3. If you eat things or leave things, he abruptly stopped speaking. His eyes darted to the right. Belle followed his gaze, expecting to see a crazed person bearing down on her. Instead, she saw the Countess returning. "Hurry, Arena," Lucanus said. Working together, the beetle and the spider quickly pushed the entire plate of sweets off the table. It shattered loudly. Lucanus flew away. Arena scuttled off. "My word," the Countess exclaimed. "What happened?" Belle told her. "Disgusting creatures. But at least they're gone now." "The mad woman didn't approach you, did she?" she asked. "No," Belle said. "Good. That's a relief. She's capable of anything." "She's capable of anything, Belle. You don't ever want to find yourself alone with her," said the Countess gravely. Belle nodded. "Did you find your relative?" she asked. The Countess smiled. "I did. We had a lovely chat. I would have introduced you, but she was in a bit of a hurry." She motioned a waiter over and paid their bill. "I must return home now," she said. "It's getting late. I should get some rest. You should too, Belle. After all, we have made much planning to do." Oh, we have much planning to do. Rome is lovely this time of year, or maybe Florence. The Countess kept talking, and Belle, carried away by her descriptions of Italy, was only too happy to listen. Her uneasiness about Lucanus and his strange warnings, and her bafflement over how they would get to the places like Rome and Florence, evaporated as the Countess rhapsodized over the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel or the shapes along the Ponte Vecchio. Arm in arm, they strolled back toward the carriage. On the way, they stopped in the palace's country yard, where they watched a troupe of acrobats from Shanghai, conjurers from Zanzibar, and a magician from Constantinople. "Oh, look," the Countess suddenly said, pointing to the center of the yard. "Monsieur Trécu is here. His creations are the best in Paris, Belle. You simply must see them." She tugged on Belle's arm, hurrying her to a striped marquee turquoise blazed at either side of it. Under it were three people. Each was perfectly still. The first, a gentleman, was seated at a harpsichord, his head bent. Another, a king with a crown on his head, was frozen in a bow. Across from him, a queen was executing a curtsy. Only as Belle drew closer did she realize that they were automations. Realize that they were automations. Their heads and hands were Pipier match. Their gracious smiles were painted on. Their eyes were glass. Others spectators joined, Belle and the Countess. "That's Tranquille himself," one whispered, pointing to the right of the Marquis. A weary, bald man stood there, and one hand folded over the other. Ruffles from his white shirt spilled out from his long gray coat. His eyes were sharp and watchful. After a moment, he gave a shrill, squawking cough, and a hush fell over the crowd. When they were perfectly quiet, he pulled a large brass key from the pocket of his coat. "The key to life," he intoned, holding it high. Then he walked over to the harpsichord player, inserted the key in his back, and turned it. An awe-struck "oh" rose from the crowd as the player's hands moved over the keys and the notes of a minute were heard. Monsieur Trécu then wound the queen. Her chest expanded just as if she were really drawing a breath. She rose from her curtsy, lifted her head, and smiled. It was the king's turn next. He straightened slowly and offered the queen his hand. The two began to dance, their movements jerky and shuddering at first, then graceful. "I give you King Otto and Queen Matilda," Monsieur Trécu shouted. The audience applauded. "They are remarkable, are they not?" the Countess whispered to Belle. For a few magical moments, Belle almost believed the figures were human. But then they began to slow. The musician's sleeve slid back slightly as he played, revealing the metal joints of his wrists. His head dropped, his hands froze, the music stopped, the queen's legs stiffened, her smile hardened. The king, who'd been the last to be wound, danced alone for a few seconds, and then he too began to slow. The cogs and gears that animated him judgered to a halt. His legs stopped, his shoulders sagged. In the instant before his eyes closed, they met Belle's. The look in them was so full of longing, that Belle's heart hurt for him. He thrust a hand out, reaching for her, then slumped over, his head hanging. "Oh," Belle cried, "poor King Otto." The Countess turned to her. "What's the matter, child?" she asked. "He looks so sad, my lady, as if he wanted so much to be alive." "He did, yes," the Countess said thoughtfully. A small boy moved among the crowd, cap in hand, collecting money for Trécu. Seeing him, the Countess reached into a small silk purse she was carrying and drew out a silver coin. Belle had seemed so moved by the performance that she wanted to contribute too. The night she'd left Villeneuve in search of her father, she'd quickly grabbed a few sous as she'd run out of her house in case she needed any money. The small copper coins were not worth much, but they were all she had. She'd kept them in the pocket of her blue work dress together with her linen handkerchief as small, touchable reminders of home. Nevermore had transformed that dress into a beautiful gown. Would the coin still be in the pocket? She searched the skirts of her gown to see if they contained any pockets. Finding one, she dipped her hand inside it. Her fingers closed on her small copper coins. Her handkerchief was there too. Drawing 2 coins out, she waited for the boy to approach. "That's so kind of you, Belle," the Countess said approvingly. "I only wish it was more," said Belle. "Nonsense. Whatever you give will be much appreciated." "Here's the young fellow now. Go ahead," the Countess urged. The boy came up to them smiling. The Countess dropped her coin in his cap. Belle was just about to do the same when out of nowhere a woman thrust herself between Belle and the little boy. She pushed Belle away, snatched the cap out of the child's hands, and ran off with it. It happened so fast, Belle didn't have time to even gasp. The woman was wearing a hat with a veil. Belle saw nothing of her face. All she caught was a swirl of white skirts, and then the woman was gone. "Stop, thief!" Tranquil yelled. "Catch her!" bellowed a man in the crowd. "Hurry, she's getting away!" shouted a woman. But it was too late. The woman was already on the far side of the courtyard. She ducked through a doorway and disappeared. Did she just steal the little boy's cap? Belle asked, outraged. Her hands were shaking. She put her coins back in her pocket, certain she would drop them if she didn't. "I believe she did," the Countess said. She was still staring after the thief. Her eyes were smoldering with anger. "Where did she come from?" Belle asked. "She was lurking in the shadows, most likely, waiting for her chance," the Countess said. That made no sense to Belle. Wasn't Nevermore the Countess's book? "But Madame Comtesse, you are writing this story," Belle said. "How can such a person push her way into it if you don't wish it?" "Ah, Belle, that is every writer's lament," the Countess replied, sighing. "These troublesome characters, they do as they wish, and we authors have little to say about it." Taking Belle's arm again, she added, "Poor child, you're trembling. Come, we must find Monchard and the carriage. I believe we've had enough excitement for one night." She led Belle away from Tranquil, his Mercure, and the milling crowd, distracted by a man at the edge of the courtyard who was juggling a hatchet, a small dog, and a pineapple. Belle didn't notice as the Countess' gaze slid back to Monsieur Tranquil. She didn't see Tranquil nod at the Countess and pat the lifeless king and smile. All right, so that is the end of that chapter. Chapter Chap.25. This is Char, like Char's Web, and stay tuned for more. Have a good rest of your day, and leave any likes, and feel free to subscribe. Thanks. Bye.